Thank you very much for those very kind words of introduction. And it's really my pleasure to participate in today's Depolarization Thursdays. And thank you for the honor. I feel that it's really a privilege for me to be asked to share my experiences. Now, first of all, I just wanted to state that polarization in Kenya is primarily associated with ethnic identity. The instrumentalization of ethnicity for political ends is identified as a divisive issue and a negative part of Kenya's political culture. Elections trigger deep polarization in Kenya due to the winner-takes-all political system that creates high-stakes political contests. Hence, elites mobilize voters along tribal lines to win control over the government. The polarization is driven and sustained by several factors, key among them, ethnic coalitions. Now, in Kenya, there is no one single ethnic community which is big enough to win an elections all by itself. And therefore, the coalitions are necessary, but the problem is that the coalitions are made based on ethnicity. And in this, therefore, politicians form ethnic-based alliances, turning the election into us versus them contests, where losing means a community gets cut out of government resources, services, and jobs. The second driver of polarization is disputed elections. The weak trust in institutions in Kenya leads to rejection of elections, for example. And when that happens, then you have the problem because it leads to violence. The third trigger is the disinformation and hate speech, and particularly during this era of social media. Economic inequality, and especially the high unemployment, makes the youth vulnerable to be hired as political goons and agitators. So this is the socio-political context within which the National Cohesion and Integration Commission was created in 2008. And especially this is what happened and clearly manifested in the post-election violence after the elections of 2008. So the question that Kenyans came up with is, how can we avoid a repeat of what happened in 2007, 2008? And how can we make depolarization and peace building as an ongoing feature of electoral cycles in Kenya? So it is because of that that then we have NCIC. Now, today I will focus not on the history and the creation of NCIC, but basically on the experience during the time of my commission, which is in the last 6 years from 2019. Now, I will focus on that and first of all say that we came up with quite a number of initiatives that have helped in the process that actually became much more cohesive, much more peaceful in the lead up to the elections of 2022. The first one, the first initiative was that of trust building. This is because when we did a study, it was very clear that trust deficit in the institutions, particularly the IEBC, that is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the lack of trust in the police, lack of trust in the judiciary, and in the media. These are what made us therefore bring together those as states and non-state agencies to have a platform that we could discuss issues of trust building in the leading to the elections of 2022. The second initiative is we came up with a wall of shame and a wall of fame. Now, when we came up with this idea, we were told that Kenyan politicians don't care whether you shame them or whatever you do to them. But to our pleasant surprise, hate speech reduced considerably when we came up with especially the wall of shame. And many politicians who had been involved in hate speech reduced that considerably. The third initiative was the publication of Hate Lex. Hate Lex is a lexicon of words and phrases that, when used, can incite violence. A very good example of this is mandoadoa, which is a Swahili word for spots in a dress or in a cloth that need to be cleaned out. And mandoadoa, therefore, was in Kenya in 2007, 2008, what cockroaches were in Rwanda in the lead up to the genocide. So that is why we banned the use of those words and phrases. The other initiative we took was on hotspots mapping. This was a way of having identifying what I would say the possible or likelihood of violence. In our hotspot mapping, we came up with a finding that 23 counties out of 47 counties showed likelihood of violence, of elections-related violence. And therefore, this actually was very, very important because it was used to help the country to have early warning and early response. We identified 3 categories of vulnerabilities during this hotspots mapping. The number one was pre-existing conflict elements, like inter-ethnic conflicts with disputes over land, disputes over boundaries, pasture and water, livestock, etc. The second category is what we call prospective triggers. This is where there were levels of hate speech, interference with the mainstream media, and contesting of party primaries. Those are the situations where party primaries, where they had appeared, especially if there was a by-election, we found that refusing to recognize those results was another category. And the third one was weak institutional capacities, leading to, therefore, counting mainly on the police to bring about, to curb violence. And especially when it came to the IEBC and the judiciary, this is where we found that there were very serious lack of capacity in those institutions to deal with the problems. Then we came up with what we called the Political Decency and Accountability Charter. This is a charter that we created and they made all the presidential candidates to sign and committing themselves to abide and accept the results. But if they didn't, then they shouldn't go to the streets and call for people to demonstrate, but go to court, because that is where it was important to follow the rule of law. And actually, all the presidential candidates signed this charter, and all the chairpersons and the general secretaries of the 89 political parties, registered political parties in Kenya. The other important initiative we took was the decentralization of NCIC work. Until our time, the work of NCIC was coordinated and done basically from the headquarters in Nairobi. Now, we decided to decentralize and create 10 regional offices so that we are closer to the people. And this was very important. And in fact, that has helped tremendously, because then the work that we do, and especially the decisions that we made, are closer to the people, and therefore people identify with them and they are able to continue with that work. Finally, we created what we call the Kenya Eminent Persons Platform. This is a platform of eminent Kenyans from, non-partisan, those who we knew were highly respected, and their social status in the society was such that if they called on Kenyans not to be involved in violence, they would be taken very seriously. It did. And the reason for creating a CAP, as we called it, is so that in the event the elections of 2022 became violent, especially post-election, then we would have a team of people who would do what the Kofi Annan team in 2008 did. That time we had to go out of the country to appeal to the African Union and the United Nations to send people to Kenya to help. This time round, we decided that we will do it ourselves because we have the capacity to do it. Now, thankfully, the CAP was not needed, because the elections of 2022 became the most peaceful elections in the country in post-multi-partism in the country. There was not a single election-related death in 2022 elections. So that is really something that we must say, because of those initiatives we took as NCIC, plus, of course, the others with whom we work, it helps to have the most peaceful electoral process before, during, and after the elections. Now, because we needed to have continuity after my commission, we did two things that we have passed on to my successor commission. One, we did a study on evolution of organized criminal gangs in Kenya. And here we came up with the findings which are now becoming extremely useful, because there is a lot of concern now because of the proliferation of goons and organized criminal gangs in Kenya. The second study we did was guidelines to conducting peaceful and credible elections in Kenya. We used our experience and put down what in a document that we have passed on to our successor commission. So let me end there. Thank you very much for listening to me.